Good day, Tidicians, and welcome back. This is again your learning partner, Teacher Anna. Now let's go to lesson number 2. So here in lesson number 2, guys, we are going to learn about imaging and the use of imagery. So what is imagery? So always remember, guys, for this lesson or in lesson 2, we are going to uh, learn and even get the uh, ILOs or learning outcomes number 3 and 4. So you are expected to value the significance of the different kinds of imagery in creative writing here in lesson 2, and you are also going to identify the different kinds of imagery. So in the old days, guys, we just have 5 types of imagery. But now, in our new book, and even in the uh, new books that is being published, we have 7 types of imagery. So let's try to know what is an imagery. Okay? So imagery, guys, is a part of figurative language in a literary work, whereby the author uses vivid images to describe a phenomenon. So dito, guys, ang author natin is gumagamit siya ng mga vivid images. So we are going to use our creative words to describe an image. For example, we are going to use the visual imagery, the auditory imagery, the olfactory imagery, the gustatory imagery, and the tactile imagery. So our 5 senses. Okay? So example nito is the visual, which describes about what we see. So it talks about the colors, the patterns, the size, shapes. So ano nakikita ng mata? So it talks about visual imagery. So this is the old types of imagery, while in the new one we have 7. So next is the olfactory. So it describes what we smell. So most likely it's the sense of smell. So it talks about the nice fragrances, the bad odors. That is part of olfactory. Next is gustatory, so which describes what we taste. So we have the sour, the sweet, the acidic, the bitter, the salty. So that is part of gustatory. Next is tactile. So it also describe what we touch or feel. So this one is the sense of touch or feeling. So its texture, its movement, its temperature. So these are part of tactile. So we also have auditory, which describes what we hear or the sense of hearing. So for example, what we hear as music, the silence, and the noise. So those are parts of auditory. Now let's go to the new one. So there are 7 types now of imagery. So here, I think nawala ang isa. Saan nawala dere? So we have the visual, the auditory, the gustatory, the olfactory, the tactile. So ang nadungag is the kinesthetic imagery. Aesthetic imagery, and the other one is organic or the erotic imagery. So mao na siya ang nadungag, si kinesthetic and si organic imagery. So let's try to know more about the visual imagery. So unsa dining visual imagery class? So in this form class or class of poetic imagery, the poet appeals to the reader's sense of sight. So, parehas lang gihapon sa visual imagery. So as I say a while ago, it talks about the sense of sight. So the narrator of the poem sees. Okay, so ginanarrate niya kung unsa iyahang nakita. So that's why it may include the colors, the brightness, the shapes, the sizes, and the patterns. Here also to provide readers with visual imagery. So nagtabang ni siya para ma-providean ang mga readers o visual imagery. So that's why the author usually used metaphor, simile or personification in their description. So just like the poem of William Wordsworth, classic 1804 poem, which is entitled I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. For example, I will read it for you. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So here, as you can see, when you read this one, you are going to get visuals. So visuals of a cloud, visual of a lake, and the lily. Okay? So now let's go to auditory imagery. So most likely this is more about the sense of hearing or sound. So guys, it may include music and other pleasant sounds. We also have harsh noises or silence. In addition to describing a sound, the poet might also use a sound device like onomatopoeia or words that imitate sounds. So reading the poem aloud recreates the auditory experience. So most likely guys, kung basahon nimo ang isa ka foam or even creative writing na output, and then you will hear or you can read imitate sounds and even onomatopoeia. So let's try to read about To Autumn or a poem of John Keats which is entitled To Autumn. So this is the final poem he wrote before abandoning the craft. Because poetry wasn't paying the bills, he concludes with auditory imagery. So ang iya daw pagkahawd sa poems, poetry, kay dili daw makabayad sa iyaha mga bayronon or mga bills niya. So that's why this is the last poem na iyahang gisulat before he abandoned the craft of poetry. So let's read. Where are the songs of spring? Ah, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too. While barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hoe. Then, in a wailful choir of the small nets mourn, among the river shallows borne aloft, or sinking as the light wind leaves or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat with hilly born. Caged crickets sing, and now with trebles soft, the red-breast whistles with a garden cropped, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. So here guys, because of the word music, so most likely you are going to hear, if you imagine something, you hear something about the uh, wind, about the welfare choir. So most likely it talks about auditory imagery. Now, let's go to gustatory imagery. So ano pala itong gustatory imagery? Gustatory imagery, guys, is the poet or the writer appeals to the reader's sense of taste. So most likely mo ni siya ang ginagamit sa creative nonfiction about food or kanang maghatag ka og reviews about food. So it may include the sweetness, the sourness, the saltiness, the savories, or spiciness. So this is especially effective when the poet describes a taste that the reader has experienced before and can recall from sense memory. So for example, guys, it is the foam discomposed of Walt Whitman. So let's read about this foam. Oh, how can it be that the ground itself does not sicken? How can you be alive, you growths of spring? How can you furnish health, you blood of herbs, roots, orchards, grain? Are they not continually putting distempered corpses within you? Is not every continent worked over and over with soured? So here we can really furnish, and even taste the sourness of a certain food. Okay? Now, let's go to tactile imagery. So, here in tactile imagery, guys, or in this form of poetic imagery, the poet appeals to the reader's sense of touch. So, dito na, gamitin na natin si sense of touch. By describing something the speaker of the poem feels on their body. It may include the feel of temperatures, like is it hot, is it cold, the textures, and other physical sensations. So let's try to have the example of the poem of Robert Browning's in 1836, which is entitled Fort Faria's Lover. So let's use our sense of touch. When glided in Porphyria strait, she shut the cold out of the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up, and at the cottage warm. So most likely it talks about, or it you can sense it with your sense of touch, or you can think about it with your sense of touch. Now let's go to number 5, which is the olfactory imagery. So in this form of poetic imagery, guys, the poet appeals to the reader's sense of smell. Karon ang sense of smell na pods ang sa olfactory. So, for example, the poem of H.W. Longfellow about rain in summer. They silently inhaled the clover-scented gale, and the favors that arise from the well-watered and smoking soil. So most likely, because of the word inhale, the vapors, the clover scented, so most likely it is about an olfactory or an example of olfactory imagery. Now let's go to the new one. So we have the kinesthetic imagery. So actually guys, nani siya yung number 7, which is the organic. So let's try to talk first about the kinesthetic imagery. So here in kinesthetic imagery guys, or in this form of poetic imagery, the poet appeals to the reader's sense of motion. So yang sense of motion. It may include the sensation of speeding along in a vehicle, a slow sauntering, or a sudden jolt when stopping, and it may apply to the movement of the phone speaker or narrator or the objects around them. So most likely that's why it is kinesthetic. It is the reader's sense of motion, ang pagliho. Okay, so just like the poem of W.B. Yeats, which entitled Leda and the Swan. So I will read it for you. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still, above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed. By the dark webs her nape caught in his bill. He holds her helpless breast upon his breast. Yeah, so that is a kinesthetic imagery. Talks about the movement of a girl. Now let's go to the organic or erotic imagery. So in this form of poetic imagery, guys, the poet communicates internal sensations. So kato na tong mga internal sensations or grabe na kayo nga emotion or internal emotions such as fatigue, hunger, and thirst. So we also have the fear, love, and despair. So most likely this is about organic or erotic imagery. So we have here, he makes use, we have the example of Robert Frost, his poem entitled Birches. So let's try to read it. This is an example of organic imagery. So was I once myself a swinger of birches, and so I dream of going back to thee. It's when I'm weary of considerations and life is too much like a pathless wood. So most likely this is an example of a very sad life. Okay? So please refer to your module guys So you can read there about the organic or erotic imagery. So you can also refer to your book about creative nonfiction to know more about imagery. So thank you so much guys for listening for our second lesson. Always remember to do your very best for the assessment and make your parents proud. Thank you so much everyone. Let's go now to your assessments. Bye.